Hi guys, it's me again. I'm here to do another book review for you. This week it's Death at Intervals by Jose Saramago. The thing about this author is that I don't know very much about him. Last week when I told you about John and Carol, it came from memory, from what I've read, from what I've watched, from what I'd heard. In terms of Saramago, I don't know anything about him other than what I've read. But I didn't exactly want to just read a wiki page out to you. Tried to say Wikipedia too fast there. I didn't want to read a Wikipedia page out to you. So everything I'm going to tell you is in the book at the beginning. He was born in Portugal in 1922. He didn't become an author full-time until 1979. His works include poetry, plays, short stories, and over a dozen novels. He won the Nobel Prize in Literature, as you can see at the top there, in 1998, but he unfortunately died aged 87 in 2010. A few of his other works include The Bible According to Jesus Christ and Blindness. I haven't read anything else. That is all I know about the author, and that's all I know from just reading what's introduced in the beginning of the book. So what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to read the blurb. In an unnamed country, on the first day of the new year, people stop dying. Amid the general public, there is great celebration. Flags are hung out on balconies and people dance in the streets. They have achieved the great goal of humanity, eternal life. Death is on strike. Soon, though, the residents begin to suffer. For several months, undertakers face bankruptcy. The church is forced to reinvent its doctrine, and local mafia smuggle those on the brink of death over the border, where they can expire naturally. Death does return eventually, but with a new, courteous approach, delivering violet warning letters to her victims. But what can death do when a letter is unexpectedly returned? It's a good blurb on the back. It's strange because it kind of encompasses more than half of the book, so more than half of the book you already know what happens. The one thing I will say about this book though is it does the one thing that I didn't think it would, and a lot of books wouldn't, and that would be dealing with the macro side of the story. So in terms of nationally, they talk about religion, politics, health budgets, hospitals, care homes, the future of humanity, basically. Even going so far as to think of things like life insurance policies and undertakers, as was said. They do zoom in every now and again, not a lot. I can only really remember once or twice where it's relevant to the plot. They zoom in on one family. I'm not really spoiling anything because it's kind of there. They zoom in on one family who inadvertently start a rush of people smuggling relatives over the border. So it remains very much, kind of macro until about halfway through, just over halfway through, where the paradigm shifts very weirdly to death. And I don't mean death as a concept, death as a discussion, I mean death as a person. And in this, death is everything that humanity imagines death is. Death is a she, death is a skeleton, death is, not a physical thing, even though she can appear that way. She's not physical, she doesn't walk down the street as a skeleton, she's just everywhere and nowhere at the same time. She has a scythe, she's dressed in a shroud, and she sits writing her letters. In that way, there's nothing surprising about the shift, but the shift is still weird compared to the rest of the story, because the rest of the story then feels like a setup for this sort of mini story. So you kind of feel like you're reading a really long prologue, and then you have the story. Or the story and then a weird epilogue. Couldn't think of the word there. Which keeps it interesting. But at the same time, you do kind of, when you get into the next chapter and the paradigm doesn't shift back, you kind of think to yourself, is this how the rest of the story is going to go? Okay. In terms of narrative, the narrative, I feel, is the one thing that lets this book down. I think that it's too much all at once. There's no real pause. There's no paragraph structure apart from the chapters. To be honest with you, I couldn't tell you if the chapters are long or short, because I don't feel like my opinion on that matter would be objective, because the sentences are so long, and again, like I said, there's no paragraphs. So even this one page feels like you've read a lot. You know, especially with it being macro, you get a lot of information in 1 second, in one page. So the sentences are too long. The paragraphs are non-existent. And there doesn't seem to be much punctuation. And what I mean by that is, all there is really is just commas after commas after commas, capital letters and periods. That's it. What I mean by that is there's no dialogue. There's dialogue in the material, but there's no dialogue marks. So the only thing that you have to indicate that anyone's talking is a capital letter after a comma, and maybe the occasional she said, he said, they said. Also, it's hard to read because you kind of have to guess when people are switching between, like if there's two people talking, you kind of have to guess when one person is speaking and then the other person starts speaking. And it's separated with capital letters, but then there are some words that have capital letters anyway, so you have to, it's a guessing game about who's talking, really. And it lets it down. It reads a lot like a report that you might find after a global or a national disaster like this, that might appear on some health secretary's desk, or indeed the Prime Minister's desk or the King's desk, saying why we weren't prepared for this, and just exactly what the hell went down in your department that you were supposed to handle, kind of thing. And I'm going to read to you now one sentence, and I don't like doing this, but I'm gonna, because I want you to see just what I mean about how long they are, so brace yourself. This is on page 19 for anybody that has the book. Now, however, the new guest, unless he or she came to fill some vacancy and round up the institution's income, is someone whose fate is known beforehand. We won't see him leave here to go and die at home or in hospital, as used to happen in the good old days, while the other residents hurriedly locked the door to their rooms so that death wouldn't enter and carry them off too. No, that, we know, is a thing of the past, a past that will never come back. But someone in government will have to consider our fate, us, the owners, managers and employees of these eventide homes. The fate awaiting us is that when the moment comes to down tools, there will be no one to take us in. We are not even masters of the thing which was, in a way, also ours, at least as regards the year of work we've put in, and here, it should be pointed out, it was the employees' turn to speak. What we mean is that there will be no room for people like us in the eventide homes, unless we can rid ourselves of some of the residents, an idea that had already occurred to the government following the debate about the plethora of patients in hospitals. The family, they said, should resume its obligations. But for that to happen, there would have to be at least one member of the family with sufficient intelligence and enough physical energy, gifts whose sell-by dates, as we know from our own experience and from what the world shows us, last only as long as a sigh when compared with this recently inaugurated eternity. Anyway, the remedy, unless someone can come up with a better idea, would be to create more eventide homes, not as has been the case until now, using houses and mansions that have known better days, but building from scratch vast new edifices, in the form of a pentagon, for example, or a tower, or Babel, or a labyrinth of Knossos, starting out with districts, then cities, then metropoli, or, to put it more crudely, cemeteries of the living, where fatal and irrenunciable old age will be cared for as God would have wanted until, since their days will have no end, who knows when? For the crux of the matter, and we feel it our duty to call this to the attention of the relevant authority, is that with the passing of time, not only will there be more elderly people living in these eventide homes, but more and more people will be needed to care for them, with the result that the rhomboid of the ages will be swiftly turned on its head, with a gigantic ever-growing mass of old people at the top, swallowing up like a python the new generations, who, transformed for the most part into nursing or administrative staff, to work at these eventide homes, after spending the best part of their lives caring for old crooks of all ages, both the normally old and the Methuselahs, multitudes of parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, great-great-great-grandparents, and so on ad infinitum, will in turn pile up one on top of the other, like the leaves that fall from the trees onto the leaves from previous autumns, mais où sont les neiges d'antan? The endless throngs of those who, little by little, spent their lives losing teeth and hair, the legions with bad sight and bad hearing, those with hernias, cold, those with hip fractures, the paraplegic, the now immortal geriatrics, who can't even stop the drill running down their chin. You, gentlemen of the government, may not want to believe us, but such a future is perhaps the worst nightmare that could ever have assailed a human being. Such a thing would never have been seen even in the dark caves, where all was fear and trembling, and it is we who have had experience of the first eventide home who are saying this. And in those days, obviously, everything was very small scale indeed, but our imaginations must serve for something, and to be perfectly frank, Prime Minister, hand on heart, rather death than such a destiny. That whole thing was one sentence, and it spanned nearly 2 pages. There was not a full stop in there. There was no indication of dialogue. It was simply capitals and commas. And I found reading this book really hard, to the point where I actually had to read all of it out loud, which is why you can hear my voice, to try and take in what was going on. I did find it a lot easier to read when it shifted to death. Again, not because it added any punctuation or anything, but just because it was about her and there was a lot less people in the room. It's just her talking for most of it, so there's no trying to figure out when she's talking and when someone else is talking. And when there is someone else talking, it's not as hard to take because it's not so macro. In terms of this book though, I think that it's very much, you can either look at the forest or you can look at the individual trails. As a forest, it's not a book I don't want to be mean, but it's not a book I really enjoyed reading. I found it quite a task. But there are individual bits in the book that are like when you come to a clearing in the middle of a forest and you find something so beautiful that you're so glad that you just trekked for 2 hours to see just this one moment. And what I mean by that is there are some beautiful phrases, some beautiful concepts in them, the kind of which that don't hit you until you're a few words ahead. You know, like you say them and then your mind kind of echoes it as you're reading the next part and you kind of go, oh my god, that was brilliant, that was gorgeous. And I'll just, since I'm reading now, I'll just quickly find one that I found. About Aphrodites, I thought was great. On page 157, Death wonders where Aphrodite is now, the daughter of Nereus and Doris. Where is she now? She who may never have existed in reality, but who nevertheless briefly inhabited the human mind in order to create in it, again only briefly, a certain way of giving meaning to the world, of finding ways of understanding reality. And the reason I like that one is because she says, you know, she who may never have existed in reality, but who nevertheless briefly inhabited the human mind. It was just a nice little thing, you know, saying that she might never have actually been real, but for a brief time she was real in somebody's head, and I liked that. I liked that idea. So that was just an example of the little tiny sort of teardrops. They're brilliant. Together, as a book together, I think that the material is kind of strange. I think you have to have a certain appetite for the kind of material that's in this. I think it is completely let down by the narrative. It could at least deal with dialogue marks. Anything. Just put in some speech marks and it would be a lot easier to read, because you kind of go from, you don't know what's description and what's dialogue and what's, attitude. You don't get a sense of how people are talking. You don't get tone, you don't get speed, you don't get anything like that. And that's why it comes across as a report, which is why I don't know if it's on purpose, because the shift is different. Again, like I said, there's no punctuation marks added to the shift, but it does come across as different, and you'll see what I mean when you read it. It still has the same sort of feel to it, so you know it's the same person that wrote it. But I do feel like, sort of in contrast to the Torchwood book, that, the setting out of the book was perfect for the material. The setting out of this book lets the material down. What could be a really interesting book becomes a chore. So if it's done for effect, it's overwhelming and it lets it down. I feel like there's far too much to get in the time that you get without the sort of pauses. Although there are a lot of commas, it's just not enough on its own. Overall, I would give this book, if I was doing it overall, not individually, because like I said, there are beautiful little bits, I would give this book maybe a 4 out of 10, purely because it was so hard for me to read and keep track of what was going on. I would never say to someone, don't get this book, because a lot of people like different things. We all have different tastes. So, you might have hated the Torchwood book and loved this one. Anything. So I will never say don't get this book. I will just say that if you're going to get this book, be prepared for it to be description heavy. Or perhaps not even description heavy, just text heavy. It's only 196 pages, but it kind of felt like reading Crime and Punishment to me, the sheer amount of text. So be prepared for that. But like I said, I would never tell you not to buy something. So yeah, that's Death at Intervals. I'm not sure what one I'm going to be doing next, because it's not until I go to pick it up that I really think, I was thinking of doing The Great Gatsby, but again, I don't know. So I'll find out probably tomorrow when I pick up another book. So yeah. Thanks for that, guys. Let me know what you think, and any suggestions, including how I can fix the lighting in this room, or books, or whatever. Let me know below. Again, I will try and put up some links for this. Okay? Sorry if this video seems all over the place. It wasn't working for me. This is like my 5th go. Sorry about that.